Good evening, everyone. Welcome to White Ribbon Night. My name is Brad Chilcott, and I'm coming to you from what is and always will be Ghana land, now called Adelaide. And I pay my respects to elders past and present. I'm here, as you can see, with two incredible women, Rosie Batty and Vicky Welgraven, who I'll introduce more fully in a couple of moments. Before I do, just a couple of administrative things. We have just over 2,500 people with us tonight. The chat function is on, and you'll see Scott and Trent from White Ribbon commenting in there and responding to some of your questions. Ariane from Essential is our moderator, and she can respond to any of your tech questions if you can't hear or can't get logged on properly. I want you to know, though, that we will exclude anyone who isn't helping us create a safe space in that chat. We won't tolerate any misogyny, any racism, any homophobia, or any transphobia. It's also clearly a conversation about eliminating men's violence against women. While we know that there are other kinds of violence that need to be addressed, that's not what this conversation is about. So please respect that, or we'll need to remove your ability to contribute to the chat. And if things get too wild in there, we'll simply turn it off. But I'm really hoping we won't need to do that. So thanks again for joining us, and I'd especially like to welcome my very deadly friend, Vicky Welgraven. She's a proud Adnyamathanha woman from the Northern Flinders Ranges. She's a director on the Our Watch board. She sits with me on the Reconciliation SA board, and she's a member of the South Australian Premiers Council for Women. In 2018, Vicky was the winner of the individual category of the Flame of Change Unifying Support Award, which was presented by our other panellist, Rosie Batty, for her outstanding work in raising awareness and campaigning for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander women on family and domestic violence. I could go on about Vicky forever, but I'm keen to hand over to her now. Vicky, welcome.
Thank you, Brad. Before we begin the proceedings of this amazing event tonight, I'd just like to thank White Ribbon and Rosie Batty as well, and the White Ribbon staff for putting this together. What an amazing event that we're going to have tonight. So, but first of all, I just want to acknowledge the land that I meet on today, the land of the Kaurna people, and pay my respects to each and every one of those people, and to the Kaurna's elders, past and present, and also emerging. But because Australia is built on, Aboriginal land, each and every one of us, where we are zooming in from, I just want to just acknowledge each of the custodians and pay our respects to each of the elders past, present and emerging. We also recognise the strength and the resilience of Aboriginal people and respect their cultural heritage, beliefs and relationship with their land. We continue for this to be important to Aboriginal people living today. As an Aboriginal woman from the Untitled group, Northern Flinders Ranges, I would also like to acknowledge any other Aboriginal people, brothers and sisters that are linked into this event as well, and pay my respects to you as well. So thank you everyone, and have an amazing night. So, and for each of us, let's walk in peace and harmony and make Australia a great place for each and every one of us.
Thank you so much, Vicky. It's really important for all of us to remember that the privilege many of us enjoy came at great cost to others, that sovereignty was never ceded, and that injustice for First Nations people continues to this day, especially and including when it comes to gendered violence. Before I introduce Rosie, I'd also like to take a moment to acknowledge and thank Melissa Perry, the CEO of Communicare, and her team, who are the new custodians of the White Ribbon movement. I know that Communicare staff are gathered across different locations across Western Australia watching this event. And one of the great things about this new chapter of White Ribbon is this intrinsic link we now have with women's safety services and the men's behaviour change programs that Communicare have a long history of delivering. Tonight we're here to listen, to learn, and then to commit to meaningful action. We're here because we know that gendered violence is a rolling, continual national crisis that breaks into the national consciousness when one woman a week is murdered by their male intimate partner. But it also goes a lot deeper than that. It's expressed in disrespect, in sexual harassment, in the gender pay gap, and in all of the ways men use their power and privilege to control, diminish, and disempower women. White Ribbon Australia's history is well known, but it's my privilege and my challenge to be a part of the team starting this new chapter. Tonight, I want to listen to and learn from Rosie about what that next chapter could be and should be. I'm really happy that Rosie's agreed to join our advisory council so she can give ongoing feedback and advice to this movement as well. As many of you know, Rosie knows pain that no woman should have to suffer. Her son Luke was killed by his father in a violent incident in February 2014, a horrendous event that shocked not only the nation but the whole world. Greg Anderson murdered his son Luke and was shot by police at the Tayab Cricket Oval. Rosie had suffered years of family violence and had intervention and custody orders in place in an effort to protect herself and her son. Rosie became an outspoken and dynamic crusader against domestic violence, which led her to being named as Australian of the Year in January 2015. Since then, Rosie has made the most of this position of influence, campaigning and advocating for necessary systemic and attitudinal change to address the family violence epidemic. Rosie was the chair of the first ever Victim Survivors Advisory Council for the Victorian Government for over 3 years in response to the country's first Royal Commission into family violence. She was named by Fortune magazine as one of its top 50 world's greatest leaders in 2016 and the most influential person in the not-for-profit sector on Pro Bono Australia's Impact 25 list. She's been inducted into the Victorian Honour Roll of Women and is a recipient of the Pride of Australia National Courage Medal. Rosie received an honorary doctorate in 2017 from the University of the Sunshine Coast, and she received an Order of Australia in the Queen's Birthday 2019 honours list. And it is my incredible honour to have Rosie with us for our first big event in this new chapter. So Rosie, welcome and thank you. You're in Victoria, and I'm sure everyone on this webinar's hearts go out to everyone in Victoria who's experiencing this second wave lockdown. Just briefly, how has this time been for you, and how have you been experiencing this lockdown, and what have you been working on during this time?
Well, Brad, I can see from our chat feature that there are many, some familiar names, so saying hi to me, and some places like Ballarat and Bendigo and other Victorian areas that, what is that saying? We're all in this together. Lockdown is in Victoria at this point, I think, rather overwhelming because, you know, again today the statistics are really high with the infections, and I think that it's very difficult to see that there is an end to this. So I think overall we're just getting on with it. We're wearing our masks. We're doing the things that we're asked of, but I do realise that for myself, I'm very lucky. I have a nice property. I have the companionship of my beautiful dogs and animals, but it is a really difficult time for many, and I think it really highlights people in the community that are more marginalised and vulnerable, and I realise how lucky I am. So what I've been working on actually is myself. I have been taking this time to cook nice food. I've been getting HelloFresh. This is not a plug for HelloFresh, but it has actually encouraged me to cook really nice meals for myself. I've been making bone broth soup and protein bliss balls and chia puddings, and trying to be really putting some healthy things into practice, because when you're busy, when you travel a lot, when you're under the pump, I think the things that we kind of throw out to the side are those healthy habits. So I'm taking this time to really slow down, to really appreciate what I do have, and yeah, like everybody else, we're having to make the most of the situation we find ourselves in.
Thanks, Rosie. I wish I had been looking after myself so effectively. That's not how I've been spending the last 4 weeks, that's for sure.
I've even been doing Dry July, and anybody that knows me knows I've been, and I've got some really good donations. So the question is, after tonight, will I crack open a bottle of wine or will I wait until tomorrow? I'm not going to say either way. You'll have to work that one out.
Well, we're now 4 weeks in since the relaunch of White Ribbon Australia. 4 weeks on Wednesday it was. And I know that you've been supportive. You've joined our advisory council, for which we're really thankful. But how do you think we're going? What have we done well in these 4 weeks or not so well?
Look, 4 weeks is nothing, Brad. It's just a starting place. But what I have seen already, the communications I've received in my email as part of the newsletters, the Facebook community postings, I'm really I'm enjoying what I'm reading, and I'm really enjoying the flavour and the wording and the style. And I don't mean that in a I mean that I'm enjoying the content and the intent behind that. And I think that you've certainly indicated to me in those communications that a lot of what you have learnt from the old previous White Ribbon is really embedded in what you're looking to do moving forward. And I recognise that within your wording.
Yeah, and there's been a lot said publicly about White Ribbon's history, and we could really spend a lot of time, dissecting that. I've tried to address a lot of that in the public comments so far, and apologise to those who are harmed in different ways, and change some significant things about the way that we're going forward as White Ribbon. But I did remember seeing an article around the time of White Ribbon's liquidation where you were quoted as saying you were devastated by the closure of White Ribbon. And I'd love to hear more about that. Obviously, you thought there was something being lost to the broader movement. What was that about? Why were you devastated?
Because I think that certainly White Ribbon has been such a massive, played a massive part in this movement. Everybody knows the name White Ribbon, and that's perhaps the only organisation they would know in this space. And that name means a lot to a lot of people. And there's a lot of people did some amazing work. Unfortunately, there were some mistakes. There were some things that needed to change. And White Ribbon had realised this, and they had done genuine consultation, and they were reshaping what that future was going to be. And so to be forced into liquidation at the brink of this change, I just felt was really disappointing, because I think sometimes it's easy to be critical of those large organisations or people with big profiles. There is always going to be critics, and there's always going to be things that could have been done differently and better. But what's really important is to learn from those things and to be prepared to listen and to learn and to make change. Any organisation will at some point have to reevaluate their service, their products, and to survive. And I think that White Ribbon is an example of one of those organisations. It did a brilliant job of raising awareness when there was no other organisation in that space. We now, as a society and as a community, family violence isn't a dirty little secret that's only behind closed doors now. 20, 30 years ago, if you were experiencing violence, the police didn't even come to help. So there was nothing. And the women's movement, with absolutely no political support, no community support, has carved a path for women and children to keep them safe. And it has been a fight every bit of the way. Inadequate funding, resistance. It's it is uncanny. It's beyond comprehension how hard organisations have had to fight. And so I think that there is great opportunity for White Ribbon as it recognises the space that it to complement and work alongside those other frontline organisations and those others, the other expertise that already exists, as we continue to build our understanding and our knowledge, because we are still all learning, and no one organisation can fix all of this. There is so much work to do. And so, yes, I think that we are at a different place now. We recognise the issue, but we don't necessarily know what to do about it as an average person. What can we do? What can we do?
Yeah, and you mentioned in consultation that we did a lot of consultation in this period before the relaunch, and as you said, and as I've seen pop up in the chat a little bit as well, White Ribbon was really turning things around towards the end. Delia and Liam and the team had really started to rebuild trust, and it was disappointing that the liquidation happened at that time when it was on the way to some significant change. But you also mentioned there's always this degree of opposition to the work that needs to be done to keep women safe. So many champions in the women's movement who've been fighting for so long for change. And when you and I spoke on Tuesday, you said that the pandemic has so clearly demonstrated that if there's a threat to the economy or to business, that swift and decisive action is taken by our leaders at almost unlimited cost. And you asked the question, what is it about one woman a week being murdered that doesn't get that same kind of response? And so I'm wondering, what have you learned as a leading advocate in this area about what does work and what does help create change when we're facing that kind of dichotomy, I guess?
Look, I think, and very sadly, Luke's tragic death was another a moment in time where it took Australians far and wide, and even overseas, couldn't believe that a young boy could be killed in public at a cricket match by his father. It was beyond comprehension. And so that caught everybody's attention, and horror and shock. And of course, when I chose to speak out against the well wishes and the, my friends and people trying to support me at the time, they didn't want me to do that, but I did it anyway. But that was a key moment in time for society to take stock and say, how could that happen? And remember, we had the bushfires, and just before COVID, we had Hannah Clark and her 3 little children burned to death in her car. That was probably the most horrific thing I've ever heard. It affected me deeply. Unfortunately, with COVID, all of a sudden, that tragic incident gets pushed aside again. But for quite some time, we were again in complete dismay. How could this happen? What can we do to stop this? This cannot keep happening. So, what is it that we can do? Well, it's literally, why is it that governments, and is it that we're desensitized? Is it that we don't see a solution, so it's just something we have to put up with and accept? But I often used to say earlier on, remove the word family, remove the word domestic, and just call it what it is. It is violence, and it would be unacceptable on the street, in a train station, in your workplace. It's violence. And if you actually change that to family terrorism and use the word terrorism, you again get a very strong reaction, because we put more concern and emphasis on the threat of overseas terrorism when you are more likely to experience terrorism in your own house by someone you know. So I do feel that our political appetite is adjusting and changing. And certainly through COVID, I'm seeing campaigns running where we're realizing that through any crisis, it creates huge pressure within families and relationships. And there is always increased violence. And so we that at this point in time, I have no doubt that it is very difficult for organisations and the police and those involved to be responding to the volume of and concerns. And of course, through isolation, because that's what we are. We're being reduced in our community engagements. We're in lockdown. The opportunity in the environment for abuse to go unapprehended or unseen is even worse. So I think that we are getting to the place where we're now more openly able to say and name it gendered violence. It wasn't that long ago. As soon as you mentioned that, as soon as you said men's violence, it would be incredibly uncomfortable, and you would be very much shut down. Because we want to blame violence on drug and alcohol abuse. We want to blame it on anything and everything. And we find it very uncomfortable to actually recognize that the violence that's committed is overwhelmingly by men. And then we counteract that statement with, but it's not all men. And that is, of course, an obvious statement, because we know it's not all men, but it is indeed overwhelmingly men. So I do think there are improvements and changes, but we still have a long way to go. And unfortunately, we will never have enough refugees. We will never have enough money for frontline services. Because whilst we try to keep, supporting and helping victims of violence, we need to understand, how do we stop it from happening? And this is where it becomes complex and difficult and challenging to know what those avenues are and how to do that.
Yeah, I mean, when I think about the scale of the problem, even beyond the statistics of women murdered and police call-outs, the scale of the problem involves sexual harassment in workplaces. It involves, the glass ceiling and the gender pay gap, and the attitudes of disrespect, and the stuff we see in the media from male commentators, and the scale of this issue and the depth of its ingrainedness in our culture is so huge. There's just so much to do, and this might be a hard question to answer, but what do you think White Ribbon's role in all of that is? What should we be focused on and directing our efforts towards?
Well, I think, as you say, it's so ingrained and it seems so overwhelming, but I think it's really important to recognise, when you can see something that is evidence that we are actually moving forward. Those comments that the police may make in public where it's victim blaming, that just doesn't sit anymore. Sports commentary, any sexist remarks, they will be called out. So we are recognizing and seeing that, and we're not letting them go, and people are taken into account. Sometimes it's really harsh and very uncomfortable, but it is happening. What the part the white ribbon can play, I think, is really important. And you know, how do we engage with men? How do we engage with young boys? Well, certainly, I know here in Victoria, we're doing a lot of work with respectful relationships in schools. You know, we have got to have those conversations, and that is pioneering work, because approached incorrectly, you alienate or people close down. But certainly, there is a lot of work to be done as we look at attitudes and behaviours of young people, that entrenched, you know, entrenched attitudes that just continue to perpetuate. How do we continue to modify and build on those, and improve, because that's where we will see change. And I think that, you know, with White Ribbon, they have a place and a space, and and as you've already started to do, it's recognising, by listening to victims of family violence, their experiences with the organisations that work with them, to work how to advocate and campaign potentially, and work alongside of them. And I haven't got all the answers, but I do know there's a lot of people who have been really keen to share what they think White Ribbon could do. And you can't do everything, and this is the overwhelming reality. There is so much that you know, I used to feel so stretched in everything I could see that needed to change, and I tried to be across all of that. So it will take time, I think, but certainly by looking to engage at community grassroots, when people want to do something, you know, we know that White Ribbon, we used to get behind the marches and have the and afternoon teas or breakfasts or whatever, you know, that's okay, except what else? Because those are the kind of awareness raising events, but nothing changes from that. So that's the challenge, into advocacy, into action, giving people the tools and the understanding of what they can do, either in their workplace or within their family, because everybody's committed to doing something. We're all committed to doing something, but we just don't know what it is we can do. And I think in the area of gender inequality, it doesn't seem like it's enough. It doesn't seem like much. But having a look at how your respect for your relationship is with your partner, and how you are parenting your children, and all of those things make profound change. But, you know, so it's really, I think those are part of the roles that you can look at, is how do you give people tools and an understanding of that these are meaningful things that they can do.
Yeah, as you've probably seen a little bit since the relaunch, we've been talking about that shift from awareness to advocacy. I think thanks to, you know, the decades of work of the women's movement, thanks to you, and then in response to the murders of Hannah Clark and her children, I think Australians are very aware of the scale of this challenge. And as you say, we need to give men and boys and all Australians the tools to raise their voice in solidarity with victim survivors and safety services and all women, to address the cultural and political and systemic barriers to a future without men's violence. But even when we think about advocacy, there are like so many things we could be pointing at. There are problems in family law. There are men's behaviour change programs that have 40-week or more waiting lists. I've been talking a little bit about coercive control laws that some other jurisdictions in other countries have brought in. Are there any priorities that you see that we should collectively raise our voice to put pressure on?
Well, certainly in the 6 years I've been advocating, I can say overwhelmingly that our family law court system is a really, really huge concern. And there are many people who have, you know, certainly been trying for a very long time to create the changes within that system, because it's really failing so many children and putting them at significant risk of harm and damaging their lives irreparably. So the family law court system, and certainly I understand, you know, whether it's coercive control and other legislative changes we look to introduce, lots of these things appear to be an obvious solution, but invariably it's way more complicated than that. And an introduction of legislation doesn't necessarily rectify the problem. So much within our court systems is cultural. In the end, they're a patriarchal model. And it's culture, it's the internal culture of all these these systems that needs to be addressed. And that is work that will take generations. And one of the things I have learned is we put pressure on ourselves to create change that we want to see immediately. And we desperately want that because we don't want a woman to be killed this week, but she will be. What I've had to learn is cultural change and systemic change. This will take generations. And what we're doing right now, hopefully your children and your grandchildren will benefit from. And I think that's the hardest thing to accept, is that this change takes time. And this is why we get frustrated. This is why we get critical. This is why, you know, because it's not good enough. It's not good enough. And when we look at the campaigns that have been successful and have changed the way that we conduct our lives, we can see campaigns that have been successful. I tell you what, when I was 18, I did drink a lot and drove home from the pubs, barely able to see over the steering wheel. Everybody did drinking and driving. I now, if I ever did that and caused an accident, the shame I would feel, it's not about the fine or loss of license, it would be the shame I would feel of harming somebody. So we have, you know, we certainly are aware that through speeding and the death tolls on the roads, we've, you know, certainly that's a challenge still, but we understand. And, you know, the safety belt campaigns and the drink driving and the safety belts and speeding, but also, you know, smoking. When I grew up, I stole cigarettes out of my father's packet and thought I was cool. And I've smoked on and off most of my life. Now it's socially, you know, unacceptable. You wouldn't dream of lighting up a cigarette in your workplace or at the hospital, as, you know, coming out of an operation, lighting up straight away. You might have to go down the road and do it in your gown, but you can't do it in your room. So I think that, you know, I don't mean that these things are not as complex as violence. I realise that. But if we can't look at where we have adapted and changed our behaviours, then, you know, everything seems futile. And so I like to look at those examples and say, you see, you know, and somebody used the saying the other day to me, I can't remember what the context was, but they said it at least 3 times, and they were talking about the rule of thumb. And I nearly piped up and said, do you know where that saying comes from? That comes from, you know, in the rules in the law in Victoria back in that day, where you could beat your women and children legally, providing it was nothing wider than your thumb. So, you know, we are improving, but we still have so far to go. Yeah.
Yeah, you mentioned when we spoke the other day that it's going to take generations to destroy the effing patriarchy.
I was too nervous about using that word. I know, he encouraged me to, people. He encouraged me to. But you're right. You know, it's very frustrating.
But and you're right, and I'll come back to that in a moment. But there's definitely a tension for us where we need to address that long-term cultural change, but at the same time do what we can as people who don't want to see women harmed at the hands of men anymore to stop that right now as well. And so it's bringing, you know, for me as a volunteer for White Ribbon in the past, I used to run the march in Adelaide and do that with a bunch of other advocates, both men and women. For me, it was always thinking about what happens next. Now that I've said that I want to stand up and speak out and take action, I want to be shown not just how to do that by speaking to my friends whose relationships might look sketchy, or you know, being a good bystander, which is really, really important. But also when the women's movement is saying we need change in this area, I want to have an avenue to raise my voice and be in solidarity. And I think I think those two things need to go hand in hand, is a long-term cultural change that we're all committed to and working towards, but also when we say we want to take action, actually taking some action when action is called for.
Well, I think also, Brad, it's not necessarily about looking like interjecting when when you see physical violence. And we always kind of, I suppose there's still that assumption that when we talk about family violence, it's physical, when there are, you know, we realize more and more how many different forms of violence there are, equally as sinister, equally as harmful. And, you know, certainly here in Victoria, I'm not sure whether the national, we have started to see some quite good bystander campaigns where it sometimes only needs to be a subtle demonstration of disapproval or non-engagement. You know, I can certainly remember when I was 16, my first job in the bank in the UK, we would have our coffee break, and the more senior blokes, you know, married, granddads, whatever, they always looked old to me. They may have only, actually, I'm probably older than them now, but they were seemed to quite old. They would look through the, you know, through the car park window and just leer at the women coming and make comments about the size of their boobs, you know, and things like this. And I would think, does my dad talk like that? I've never heard him talk like that. So what is it about, you know, language between men that they wouldn't consider talking like that in front of their partner potentially, or certainly wouldn't want anyone that they know to talk like that about their daughters? So it's kind of that language amongst men, the blokey stuff. How, you know, and this is where it's so important, of course, with the sporting codes, all that role modeling of toxic masculinity, and how that, you know, those subtle changes and subtle ways of you know, reshaping what because a lot of that is uncomfortable for many men. And, you know, I know lots of men, and they're all very different, and not everybody conforms to that rigid, that kind of stereotype. But when I look back in my past, you know, that's how a lot of it was. And in the workplace, you didn't have a safe parameters around you, and a lot of that inappropriate, you know, invasion of your space and in sexual innuendo. And, you know, I even consider when I was a little girl and watching television with my grandparents, and everybody I know of my era recalls this, what we watched on TV, and particularly the comedy, was appalling by today's standards. You know, you could, you know, whether you're looking at blatant racism or, you know, Benny Hill, we all understand, you know, it's a good job they're no longer around, because, you know, certainly they wouldn't be as popular as they were back in that era. And, you know, the younger people, you know, can't imagine why we would have thought that was funny. it's revolting. But so I think I can't even remember what we were talking about, other than I wanted to bring that into the question, Brad.
Yeah.
Sorry about that.
No, you're talking about the importance of us all trying to set that culture and make these things shameful, as you mentioned. But also,
so
I saw
not letting things slide, I guess, knowing how to and what to say, and it becomes, and those subtle things are really what can be very powerful. So when we're looking for change and people to do different things, it doesn't have to be massive. But
I noticed Violet from SSI in Sydney, raised the issue of the lack of services and the visa challenges of migrant communities, migrant women in particular. And that just made me think as well that the role of White Ribbon, as you said at the beginning, has this goodwill and has this broad recognition and knowledge. I think a big part of what we need to do is to use the privilege of that goodwill and that knowledge to get things like that on the agenda, to not take away the leadership of those communities, to listen and learn from them, but to amplify that and to get that on the national agenda. I think we have almost a responsibility to do things like that as we know about them.
Yeah.
But we talked about patriarchy earlier, and obviously I'm a white, male, cisgendered, straight, married man. A lot of privilege going on in those words and in my life. And so there's always a conversation about what role someone like me and men in general should have in the movement to end gendered violence. It's a good question to ask. There's often this tightrope, I think, that we walk of men being told to stand up and speak out, and at the same time to get off the microphone and get out of the way. So I'm interested in, and both of those points are equally valid. And so I'm interested in your perspective. What role do men have in ending gendered violence?
Oh, look, I think we can't do it without men, and it's not that it is a tightrope and it is a challenge, but certainly when you recognize and acknowledge your privilege, and that how can you not view the world through the lens that you view it through. But like all of us, we're constantly, well, I realize I hope to think I am as well, constantly learning through other people's experiences. I know nothing about what it would be like to have a disability. I've been incredibly lucky with my health, but my work has given me the opportunity to work alongside some incredibly inspiring, incredibly smart women who have a disability that you no longer see whilst you're working and communicating with everybody. But that's an area for me that's not something I know within my life. Certainly Vicky and other Aboriginal women and other Aboriginal people, I've gained so much through being able to visit Aboriginal communities, meet and talk to and learn from Aboriginal people. I'm so much richer and so much wiser and have much more insight by being open and for those to meet and to seek to learn and understand people from all walks of life. And I think that's where we learn from each other. And just like I have, friends that are black, I don't know what it's like to be black. And sometimes I'm scared I get the wrong language. And a bit, I was going to say earlier, Brad, I don't even know what cisgender is. And then you get nervous about saying the wrong thing. But really, if your intention is genuine, it's not insulting. And the way that we get to learn those terms and understand all of that is by asking those questions and by being with people and working with people to understand through their lens and their experience of the world. And so I do think there is that place, and we do need men. And as you said, it's not about stealing the microphone, putting yourself on a pedestal and telling us how it should be because you know best. And that underlying assumption that, of course, because you're a man, you really, do know better. But that's how, we all humble each other, we all call each other out. And I think that's, that's the really important, is those relationships that we build of trust and respect. And as equals.
Yeah, someone said in the chat, the problem is that good men still use violence. So following on from that, what do you think a good male role model is then? If it's not standing on a pedestal for not using violence, what makes a good male role model, do you think?
I think someone who's, you look at you look at someone who is willing to be in touch with their emotions, not afraid, not feeling that they've got this pressure to be of a certain, projecting themselves in a certain way, to actually do more listening than talking at times. There's a space and a time for a good delivery of talk, but there's often an opportunity in time, and creating that space for women to be in that space, as opposed to assuming that space for yourself. So I think that, when we are open to continue to learn from others, yes, we will trip up, we will say the wrong thing, but if you're genuine and acknowledge that, and I'm sure I will continue to make those mistakes at different times too, because how else will we learn? But providing you're willing to acknowledge that, to take that into account and reflect, and continue to move forward in the best way that you can. We're all human. We all make mistakes. No one has got the perfect, nobody is perfect. And I think that we can be really harsh with people when they trip up, and we're looking for that, and then it gets magnified, and it can be really tough. But certainly, Brad, I think, you looking at, as you keep asking the questions and keep inviting people to contribute, I think that's what people really value.
Yeah, we've called this event tonight More Than a Pledge. You can hashtag that if you are twittering along as we're speaking tonight. But I think for me, part of the More Than a Pledge is not just about the action that we've spoken about, the advocacy or the intervening, speaking up. Those are a part of it, but I think actually the first step is humility and stopping and listening and recognizing that you don't understand another person's experience, and you shouldn't assume that you do. And if the first step all of us can take, as we pledge to end gendered violence, as we choose to be a part of this movement and conversation, if the first step we can take is actually just being a bit quiet and showing some humility and listening and learning, then that can both change our character, but also inform the right actions that we take next, and make sure that we're avoiding an unhealthy pedestal or however else we want to describe some of the ways men have been problematic in this space in the past. I wanted to address one of the questions from the audience that raised ambassadors and advocates, and some questions around how do people get involved. You may have seen on the first day, actually, we announced that we were ending our ambassadors and advocates program. I don't think we need to go into a great deal of detail about why, but the new program is called Community Partners, and we are inviting everyone to, of all genders, to consider being a community partner. The idea is, rather than it just being about speeches at events or some of the things that ambassadors did before, Community Partners is intended to be a bit more what it sounds like, partnering with your local community to amplify and add capacity to the good things that are already going on, and show initiative to create new opportunities to end gendered violence and address gender inequality. You can find out a bit more about that on the website, but we're also moving towards community action groups, and the idea of those is, again, survey the good things that are already happening. Don't duplicate or copy the good stuff other people are doing, but to bring together all the relevant stakeholders, all the people that are keen to see an end to inequality and violence, and develop community action plans to work together. So you can do that in your geographic community or in also your community of interest. It might be your faith community, your sporting community, your multicultural community. And so that's kind of what we want to do to add to the More Than a Pledge statement is, yes, commit yourself to ending gendered violence, but then become a community partner, join or start a community action group, and start to develop real opportunities to create change at a local and community level. So thanks to all of those who asked about that. Really appreciate it. We probably have time for one or two questions if there are any out there in the chat. I did see one following on from Violet's statement earlier about multicultural communities. How is White Ribbon reaching out to cold communities? We've started a lot of conversations already just in the first 4 weeks. And one of the awesome things, actually, I was in Brisbane last week, and we had together some of the chairs of our regional committees and a new committee being formed in, well, I should say community action group now, but being formed in southern Brisbane. And they were actually full of people from all different multicultural communities, and it was really awesome to see that. But we've also started a conversation with the Harmony Alliance, and they're one of the women's peaks, particularly focused on refugee and migrant women. And we've started a conversation with them about how they can inform and guide our activities in that area in particular. Someone just asked then as well how we, so thank you, culturally and linguistically diverse. I'm sure I saw that on the chat. I should have articulated the acronym. Thank you very much. And similarly with First Nations communities, we have started to reach out to leaders and elders and frontline women's services. Have actually joined there's a weekly national hookup of First Nations frontline services that I've started to drop in on each week as possible, and I'm speaking to in 2 weeks' time. So we're definitely trying to consult all of those different groups. Was there was a message from Holly that I needed to respond to, I saw in the chat. If that doesn't pop up now, that's all right. Rosie, I wanted to say a huge thank you for your time with us tonight, and your generosity of spirit, and just for sharing your support for, I guess, the direction that we're taking, but also recognising, as I hope others do, that we are going to make mistakes along the way. We're listening and learning. We're trying to learn as much as we can, as quickly as we can. And I really want to encourage people to continue to reach out and let us know, you know, the good things that we're doing, but the things that we still need to learn along the way as well. Rosie, is there anything you wanted to add before we wind up?
Look, I'm fascinated with all the comments that are popping up. I normally don't let myself get hooked into them, but I have to say thank you, everybody. There's some really good comments and some really, really good, and so it's been a really, it's not easy talking in this way, in this kind of forum, and I appreciate everybody's time and their interest. You know, this is a lot of people that have shown their, you know, they could have been doing other things and yet they've chosen to be here, and I'm really appreciative of that, Brad. And I think we all, and I know I do, wish you well in this role. I'm seeing a whole stack of really positive comments coming through in support of you. You deserve it, and I think we need to, you know, get behind you. We haven't got all the answers, but we will find lots of them out along the way, and I think you've got the right approach, and I'm really looking forward to being able to support the journey for White Ribbon and everybody else involved as we move forward.
Thank you so much, Rosie, for that. To address quickly a couple of other questions. Yes, we're continuing some schools engagement. We're just consulting on a new model for the Breaking the Silence program, and our workplace accreditation program is continuing. We are just reimagining or reshaping the way that we're engaging with workplaces on the journey, and some of the evidence that we're asking for in the past against the workplace accreditation standard. We're shifting slightly as well to make it more about outcomes, measurable outcomes for humans and the culture change in the organisation. And so, yes, please get involved with both of those things in your local schools or workplaces as we go forward. I'd like to thank Rosie and Vicky especially for contributing tonight. In the background, we had Ariane from Essential and Scott and Trent from White Ribbon and Matthew from Eco Creative, doing all bits and pieces to make this work. So thank you to all of you. Thanks to the team at Communicare that are holding us up and making sure we're not falling over in these first 4 weeks of White Ribbon, and for being great custodians of this movement. And to all of you, to please get involved. We need you all. We need to all be in this together as we end gendered violence and advance gender equality. Head to whiteribbon.org.au, register your interest in community partnership or starting a community action group, or at the very least, please just stay in touch and you'll hear more about the tools and actions that will ensure White Ribbon Australia is so much more than a pledge. So thank you very much for being with us. It's been a fantastic time. And thank you again, Rosie, from the bottom of my heart for being a part of our first public events.
Thank you, Brad. I'm thrilled. And then one of the comments was, we need to see more webcasts. So I think you need to, you're on a roll, Brad. We'll put it, not with me, with others.
It's the way of the future, apparently.
It's the way. It's our only option at this point in time.
That's right.
It's our only option.
And all the best to you and all Victorians going through this period. I'm sure from all the rest of us on this call, hearts and minds are with you going through this period. So we're thinking of you, Rosie, and all Victorians on the call. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Brad.